Mitchell Paige here with me once again for a Monday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. Celebrating, chatting about whatever you want to, however you want to take it. The Indiana Hoosiers football team is now bowl eligible without a loss, and it's the beginning of October. I know we talked about this as a potential dream scenario for the first year of Kurt Cignetti, and I know a lot of us kind of just assume that, yeah, that's best case scenario, but that's not going to happen. Well, we're here, and they're unbeaten. They haven't lost. They're bowl eligible. They're being talked about for a potential dark horse for the college football playoff. And Mitchell, just what are kind of your thoughts on how things have gone? I know we've been talking about this every single week, but you've got to be as excited as you've ever been for this Indiana team, I feel like.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But it's funny, when we talked about best case scenario, it's almost to the point in the season where it doesn't feel like this is even close to where they can go. And it's a weird feeling because, we're usually you start the season looking for those 6 wins. Where are they going to come? And I can't remember. I was reading one of the players talking about it. Someone asked him, I think, after the game, like, how's it feel to be 6-0, or how's it feel to be bowl eligible? I think that was the question, not 6-0. And he said, well, that's fine, but that's not the goal. That's not what we're here to do. It's nice, but it's not the goal. The goal is to win the national championship. And anytime someone from Indiana would say that, it was kind of like, all right, dude. But now, I don't care who they've played. You still have to win. As Saturday showed, winning is hard no matter what. Winning on the road is even harder. Alabama goes to Vanderbilt, gets smoked, run out of the gym. Tennessee.
And that's a very similar stadium environment comparable to what Indiana had with Northwestern. And when I say that, because not only are the stadiums small, but you kind of outnumbered Northwestern this weekend, whereas Alabama more than likely was outnumbering Vanderbilt on the road this weekend too.
They showed I can't remember. It was some highlight from field level, and you could see the Vanderbilt stands in the background in a good chunk of it. And Laura asked me, wait, I thought this game was at Vanderbilt. It was all red everywhere. And Vanderbilt never gave up the lead. It's the first time in how many years that Alabama didn't lead the game.
Very odd.
Tennessee, high-flying offense, gets stymied at Arkansas. Teams were losing all over the place, and Indiana just does what Indiana does. They came in, take care of business. So I don't know. I'm kind of done hearing that they haven't played anybody talk.
I do want to throw in one other thing while you're talking about teams that got upset. There was one other chance where that could have happened on Saturday night, and that's for your secondary team, the Miami Hurricanes. They were able to avoid getting upset by California late at night.
Yeah, I think I've talked about it on this show before, that Maggie, my daughter, is undefeated. And so at halftime, they're getting beat 28-10. We had to go in there and say, hey, what are the halftime adjustments, Maggie? And she laid out a good plan for us to maintain her undefeated record, come all the way back, and now 12-0 for her between our two teams. Pretty insane.
Isn't that something? What a magical little run to have for your college football teams right now.
Yeah, I'm on cloud 9. There's 2 bowl eligible teams already,
and they're Indiana and Miami,
and they're my 2 squads. Absolutely.
That's crazy. I do want to throw out one more thing before we get too far away from. You were talking about players who like to mention that they want to go for the national championship. I do believe back during your playing days, there was a defender by the name of Darius Latham, who I believe was talking to the media at one point. And I don't remember when this happened, but I remember him mentioning that the goal was 12-0 and people scoffing at him for making that type of a comment back then. And this is obviously a totally different scenario, but was that one of the teams you played on whenever that quote was said?
Yeah. And I think it's one thing to say it internally and to believe it internally, but I'm more talking about my reaction to hearing that versus him saying it.
Okay.
My reaction is, yeah, you're right. That should be your goal. After watching the product that you've put out on the field for 6 straight weeks, you're absolutely right. Go for it. I saw a lot of people on Twitter that are still talking about, like, well, this guy's done this before, or just a reminder that this coach did this too. And I'm like, no.
And I'll say this, I've brought up this a few times, especially in the last few weeks. Back in 2011, Ron Zook was the head coach at Illinois, started them off 6-0, and they ended the year 6-6. Now you don't want to fall into that type of a trap. And I don't know exactly. I'm sure this is a way different day and age of college football, of course. But and he was more so on the tail end of his career as the head coach of Illinois. He ended up getting fired after going 6-6 that year. Whereas you have a brand new guy at Indiana with Kurt Cignetti. And I don't have a clue what the vibes would have been like in the locker room at Illinois whenever they were 6-0 that year. They actually got their 6th win at Indiana back in 2011. But hopefully this isn't the same thing. I don't mean to bring in the negative vibes, but for some reason that keeps creeping into my mind. And I think more along the lines with what you're saying, Mitchell. I think a lot of fans are just scared to really be on board because they know what Indiana's been forever, and they don't think that they can ever get out of that, that identity, if you will. They don't think they can ever be something more than what they've always been, so they don't ever get their hopes up too high.
I think there's some truth to that. I definitely was living in that world maybe after week 2 or week 3. Probably more when they played Western Illinois and scored 77 points and just beat the doors off of them. You start to look around, like, beating a team 35-40 to nothing is one thing. It's still hard to do. But to be able to keep your foot on the pedal when the backups come in the game, this is still Division I football. You're still playing a team with good players at most positions. So your hopes start to get a little high. And I got that. Well, let's temper expectations a little bit. I'm done with that. How often are we going to get, and hopefully a lot in the future, but there's not many fan bases in the country that get to watch a team that is as calculated and clinical and almost militant in their pursuit of executing their job. There's not many teams in the country any week of the season that'll get to say that their team executed like that, and Indiana's done it 6 straight weeks. So live in it, bask in it. Who cares? For what it's worth, I think Nebraska's in big trouble. Big trouble. I don't see any world, and I'm probably going to jinx them, but any world that they're going to have a chance after the second quarter. I just think Indiana's way too clinical. Nebraska is not talented enough or
my thing with
enough.
Nebraska, I don't know if talent's necessarily an issue. I think Dylan Raiola, their quarterback, who's a freshman, is going to be challenged. I don't want to say in a way that he hasn't been challenged yet this season because they had a tough test where they lost at home against Illinois. But I think he's going to find moments where his back's up against the wall a lot against Indiana. And Indiana's really good at responding to anything that any team has thrown at them this year. And I think they're going to be put in similar situations in 2 weeks. And I think that's going to be just another step that shows the national guys that Indiana can play with. And I know Nebraska's not the best of the Big Ten necessarily, but I think it will for sure be a step up in competition from what you faced already.
Yeah, for sure. But it's still, and again, Indiana fans bask in this. I'm not sure there's one player on their team, and maybe along the offensive line or something, but Indiana's offensive line graded out number 1 in the Big Ten, so I doubt it, and has all year. There's not one guy on their team that I want on our team over our starters. I don't care if it's the quarterback. I don't care if it's any receivers, running backs, anybody on their defense. I just don't see anyone that I want on our team. And that's a really cool spot to be in for the Indiana football Hoosiers. It just doesn't happen very often. So bask in it, live in it, Hoosier fans. We've got a squad that is dangerous, is tough, is resilient. And not one time this year have you had the feeling of even a little desperation or uneasiness.
And I guess since we're talking about enjoying it and basking in it and the prospects of this maybe not lasting as long as forever, of course, but there is obviously the talk that I've even done some of this myself of the sustainability, not necessarily from if he sticks around, but the sustainability of, is somebody going to, want Kurt Cignetti? And that's kind of a dumb question, because there's going to be a lot of programs that want Kurt Cignetti probably right now if they could. I mean,
Yep.
Florida's probably the biggest job that's going to be open at some point this season. And I do believe, and as most people believe, Lane Kiffin will be their number one choice. But if he ends up not taking that down the road, it wouldn't surprise me if Cignetti is the second choice or even the number one for other programs like that. So do you think, and I know that there's an extension that automatically happened when Cignetti earned his 6th win this past weekend, and several bonuses that were involved with that as well. And I don't know how, if he keeps winning, if those if any of that gets even higher, is financially and that type of stuff. But do you worry at all about the prospect of Cignetti jumping? I haven't given it too much thought so far. One thing I always remind myself is that he is 63 years old, and that Drew, one of our writers at Hoosier Illustrated, mentioned this during the postgame wrap up, that he thought he was going to retire at James Madison, and obviously that ended up not being the case. He's now at Indiana, trying to build this up and doing a hell of a job, obviously. But do you think the call of a blue blood type of a job, especially while he's still young enough to take said job, does that worry you at all, that he may do something like that potentially at the end of the season?
Of course. Yeah, he's exceeded everyone's expectations by a million miles. I think you can guarantee that his staff is going to get ravaged at the end of the year.
Yes, even if Cignetti is the coach next year, there's going to be a lot of changes, because there's going to be guys who want a piece of this pie, even if it's not the head of it.
Yeah, and that's just something that you live with. Nick Saban's staff had 50% turnover probably every year, at least. It's a good problem to have, that other schools want what you have. But I think there's, a couple things that we can do that as fans to make it more appealing to stay here. The school they'll front the bill.
Yeah.
They've shown a commitment to football in ways that I don't think they have really ever in the history of the program. They're going to pay them. So don't worry about, and yeah, okay, if Texas A&M somehow comes in with $20 million a year or something, or Florida, I don't think Florida is a danger at all for whatever reason. I think they hired a guy that was a little bit of a flyer that hadn't been in the SEC. I don't think their fans or alumni will approve of someone that isn't a Southern boy leading that program, because they went away from that and it's been so terrible that they're going to look at an SEC staff and hire an OC or something. But fill the stands. Keep coming. Keep showing up. Keep injecting life into the program as often as you can. Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, because when there's that kind of energy, it's infectious. It's hard to leave. When you have an entire state that has been fiending for good football for so long, whether they knew it or not, you can see it. It's come alive. Everywhere that I go now, how about them Hoosiers? Anybody that knows I played, they want to talk about Indiana. It's usually just me that wants to talk about Indiana. Now they're talking to me about them. So it's infectious, and it's kind of taken over. And when you have a scenario like that, people that love you, this world, the college football coaching carousel is ruthless and really hard on family, really hard on coaches themselves. When you find a place where someone loves you, especially when you're at 63 and not 30, I think Indiana fans have a huge opportunity to show Kurt Cignetti that we want you here forever. And I think doing anything other than that is wrong. I'm excited to see the turnout for homecoming. I'm a little worried that the wrong people will get the tickets. I don't know why that is. Homecoming dads just want to buy it because their kid goes there and they don't understand that things are changing. Haven't watched a game all year. I'm a little nervous about that, but
I'll tell you what, one thing too, I get really lasting on the Cignetti stuff and the potential of leaving. If he's able to make a college football playoff appearance here in year one, there's no reason to think that you can't replicate that in the future. Like, yeah, things are going to be more difficult no matter where you go, because like you mentioned, the entire staff is going to get different opportunities, different head coaching opportunities, especially guys like Mike Shanahan, Brian Haynes, even Tino Sunseri, even though he's only the quarterback's coach and the co-offensive coordinator. People are going to recognize how big of a part he is of this offense, and he's going to be a hot commodity. So no matter where Cignetti ends up next season, whether it's year 2 at Indiana or elsewhere in the world of college football, he's more than likely not going to have the same continuity that he's always had. So it would more than likely be, even if he's able to replicate it somehow, there's going to be a different set of growing pains because he's been able to take his staff with him pretty much everywhere. And maybe we're getting too far into the weeds of big picture stuff right now, but you can't ignore it, especially whenever you've had the start that has happened so far this year for Indiana. So where do we go from here? We've talked a little bit about Nebraska and the, hoping tickets don't get into the wrong hands. I've mentioned last week, I hope myself to be up at the Nebraska-Indiana game. It does unfortunately require certain circumstances to be met. Hopefully Indiana either has a noon or a late game, and the Louisville team that I also have obligations for has the opposite. If that's the case, I pretty much plan on being in Bloomington in 2 weeks for the first time this year. And I'm hoping that I can make that trip up and see this football team in person.
I love it. If you are, I'll be there as well.
Are have you made every game except for the opener this year?
Yeah. And hope probably be at the rest of them. There's just some magic.
That's right. You mentioned the magic. It's here.
There's some magic in the air. It will be interesting, though, if it works out and you're able to make the trip to Bloomington. That will mean that I can make both trips as well. Because Miami.
That's right, because you're wanting to go down and check out Miami taking on Louisville the exact same day.
Yeah. Speaking of some magic, there's magic.
Would it be a dream scenario or would it be nightmare scenario if Indiana and Miami met in the college football playoff somehow?
Yeah, we'll have to. That's a thought that I have had and have not quite convinced myself is possible. Yeah. That's just too much happiness. I believe that one of them can make it. Yeah. I've been sad a long time, John. I've been sad a long time. I am not convinced that I can have a scenario where I'm happy either way.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
And it's, again, like we mentioned at the beginning of this, it is not even mid-October. We're a week into the month that is October. Both these teams are undefeated. Of course, we cover one of them primarily here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. Yeah. One of them is more of a novelty for these types of segments, but it is still fun. They're both happening at the same time. And I'm hoping this ride continues, even if they somehow find a way to have a bump in the road along the way these last 6 games, and a bump in the road that doesn't include Ohio State. Because I think we're still, even though I do think that game looks a lot more manageable than it used to, I do think most people see that as an auto loss. But even if there's a bump in the road that doesn't include that game, I think there's still a lot to be excited about when you think about where this team may end up when the season ends.
Yeah, as you're looking at it, we've seen a lot of teams now. Who do you think the toughest game outside Ohio State on their schedule is?
I'd say I don't think it's Michigan. I know that used to be
I don't even think it's
the
close.
One that most people think.
I think
one thing that I don't even know if this is the correct answer. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change my mind again, even though I haven't even said it. It's Washington in 2 weeks.
100%.
Or 3 weeks, I should say.
That's the game that, for whatever reason, scares me the most. I don't think they're half as explosive as they were last year. I don't think they're quite as aggressive on defense, but they seem sound. They seem to play solid ball, similar to Indiana. Now you have to factor in their long travel.
Yeah.
That's shown to be a little bit of a beast for any team that has to do it outside of Indiana, because they just go in and then take care of business no matter what time or where it is, doesn't matter. But that's the game that is making me a little unsettled Nebraska,
Especially because
no.
now they're
Michigan
going to
State,
be
no.
rolling, and I don't know what their schedule looks like the next couple of weeks, but if they're able to string together a couple of
Yes.
wins to complement what they already did this past weekend against Michigan, they're going to have just as much momentum coming into the game as Indiana would if they're still unbeaten at that point.
Yeah. Unfortunately, speaking of Michigan, I don't think Michigan will be a ranked team when they come to Indiana,
They
and I
may
don't even
not
think
be.
they'll be receiving votes. They can run the ball, but that's about it. Like
And
they
now
don't
there's
got
another
much.
factor where you may be facing another former Indiana quarterback with Jack Tuttle if he ends up being the guy taking the
If I
snaps.
would have been taking a drink, I would have spit it out when he came running on the field. I'm like, how is what? Who is going to play quarterback for them? And I'm happy for him. That's awesome that he needs to be the starter. The other kid, sure he's a nice guy. They do nothing when he's in the game. So hopefully it is Jack Tuttle. That'll be fun. Little
It'll
side
have to be
story,
weird
but
for him, especially if he does come into an environment where it is an Indiana team that is vying for a playoff spot.
hostile. Hostile.
He may be sitting. I mean, and I know he's won a national title, even though he didn't play a major part in it in terms of what happened on the field. But he does have a ring, and it'll still be weird for him to come back and be like, "Man, I was a part of what was formerly the better days of the program, and now this is something totally next level."
Yeah. And this is the last little bit I'm going to touch on because there's a couple tweets from a couple news reporters, a guy I really like. I'm not going to say his name, comparing this to the Tom Allen days. Remember, Tom Allen did this, beat this team, did that. This is not even. This is not the same.
He did
That
that under very weird circumstances.
it was a very bizarre tweet, but there, those teams felt gimmicky. Felt, yeah, we were getting a lot of breaks, but it was a lot of 50-50 balls that went our way. It was like, holy crap, can we really do this? Can we keep doing this? This team is a machine. I keep using the word freight or the like comparison to a freight train that once it leaves the station, which is usually the opening kickoff, you better get out of the way because they're going to run you right over. And those teams did not feel, there has not been a team since I've been alive that has felt like this for Indiana, where they were disciplined and they just punched you over and over again right in the face on offense, defense, special teams. Underrated part, I was on Jim's show the other day talking about their punt returner. He didn't really do much on Saturday, but just over the course of the game, it's little things, or course of the season, little things like catching the ball so you don't lose a first down or two. Just little things. They're so sound at every position. There hasn't been a team like this in a long time at Indiana, so I will not hear. I don't care if you're buddies with Tom Allen. I don't care. That those teams were not this. They just
Last
weren't.
thing I'll share before we wrap up. This is a tweet from Mike Schumann that I saw, I believe it was last night or 2 nights ago. This is Indiana's scoring margin in the first quarter this year. Have you seen this, Mitchell?
It's an unbelievable stat.
73 points to nothing. They've not allowed a single team to score in the first quarter.
It's
And in
an
the fourth quarter,
insane
they're
stat.
outscoring them 80-17.
It's insane. Insane. Start fast, finish strong. That's the mantra for 99% of teams in college football. Indiana just does it.
And that's what they do. And
And
they
that
go
meat
into
and
the bye
potatoes
week.
in the middle, they just punch you. It's like the middle of a boxing match. They're just throwing body shots in the second and third quarter, and then they go for the haymakers to start the game and to finish. Try to knock you out.
Mitchell, I appreciate your time as always, and I look forward to doing this again. Hopefully for more wins throughout the back half of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. We got one little break. I don't know what I'm going to do.
2 breaks. We'll have the one later on in the back half of the schedule too, before
I know.
or after Michigan, before Ohio State.
Can you imagine if they're 10-0 waiting for that Ohio State
Gosh.
game? I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to wait 2 weeks. I can barely wait 2 weeks now. We're only playing Nebraska.
It is weird saying only playing Nebraska when they're having really their best start to a season in the last 10, 12 years, whatever it's been.
Yeah, they are. I don't care. They're about to
Yeah.
run into a shredder.
And we'll leave it at that. Mitchell Paige, once again, former Indiana Hoosier walk-on turned scholarship superstar. We'll do this again next week.
You're the man.